So it was about 20 some years ago. I won't be too exact because we don't need to get into those numbers. But I was having lunch with a friend and a colleague of mine. And it was a really interesting point in my career. I worked for a nonprofit. It was my first big leadership role. I was responsible for 3 departments. I was basically second in command in this organization. And I was really, moving up. And I was moving up and moving fast. And I loved my job, but I was always busy. Like I was always crazy busy. In fact, when I think back now, I think about how I always felt rushed. I was driving to work just always a little bit too late. I was rushing from meetings to meetings. I was packing too much in because I was so convinced that I could do it all, and I wanted to prove that I could do it all. And so I'm having lunch with my friend, and all of a sudden, I think our food had come a couple minutes before, and all of a sudden he said to me, he put his fork down and he looked at me and he said, "Is there someplace else you need to be?" And I was so shocked. I said, "Well, yeah, not until 2 o'clock. I've got a board meeting then." And I'd had that running through my head. I knew the board meeting was coming in. I had to make sure everything was set up. I was going to meet the board, greet them as they came in. And, you have your running list in your head. And I said, "Well, why do you ask?" And he said, "Because I finally started counting how many times you were looking at your watch." And he goes, "By the time I started counting till now, it was 37 times. Boy, I'll tell you, it was humbling, shocking, humiliating. I felt horrible. And I remember right then and there, I took off my watch and I put it away, and I actually never wore a watch again for about 10 years. I was so mortified by that experience. But it really stuck with me because I remember thinking, if I'm this distracted having lunch with a friend of mine and a colleague, how available am I to my team? Because I'm going to guess that I'm not. And if they always are seeing me being so busy, I'm probably not giving them the time and attention that they need. So I always ask leaders, are you really busy being busy? And most people will kind of sheepishly nod their head and say, "Yes, I am." And we talk about it because extroverts, the most leaders, not all, but many leaders are extroverts. And there's this sense of trying to be all, do all, and move as fast as you can. But what you are doing at that time tells a story to your team. And the question is it the story you want to be telling? A couple of years ago, I was researching different stories about really highly successful leaders and what some of their daily habits were. So one that really stuck out with me was Bob Iger with Disney. And what stuck out with me is he talked about, how early he gets up to exercise. I think it's 5 a.m. And what he would do in terms of the start of his workday. But one of the things that he said is that he would not email anyone on his team, I think until 7 or maybe even 8, I can't remember. But it was really, it stuck out to me because what a statement that you're making to your employees about balance and about life. And, he just talked briefly about not wanting to, create a scenario where people felt that they had to respond at that point in time. And it really came true to me a couple of years later, actually about 10 years ago. So flash forward, now I'm back to wearing a watch, and I'm now managing my largest team ever with about 500 employees, about 30 some managers that directly reported to me. And I've got all this responsibility that is so vastly bigger than long ago at that, what was really a small nonprofit, but seemed like such a huge job at the time. And I remember I got off an airplane and I was in Milwaukee. I'll never forget it because I'm walking through the airport and one of my team calls me, and he loved to call me Sherlock. And he's like, "Sherlock, I guess you just landed somewhere. Where are you?" And I said, "Well, I just landed in Milwaukee." "How do you know I just landed?" He said, "Because about 3 minutes ago, I got 17 emails from you." And that's what you do when you get on airplanes. Wow, what a mirror to myself really quickly. And I started laughing and I said, boy, I'm sorry, do I do that often? He goes, oh yeah, we always know when you're flying because everybody gets bombarded. And I really let that simmer in my brain for several days. And I was thinking back to how much I loved actually getting on airplanes because of that very reason. My email was this, monolith of so much stuff there. And I always leave things in my inbox if there's something I still have to do with them. And I make it a priority on Friday nights by 5 o'clock to have 0 emails in my inbox. Now, it doesn't always work, but I'm pretty good at it. And I know when I shut it down, there's more emails coming in, but there's a sense of completion with that. And when I would get on an airplane, I would have uninterrupted time. I would never connect to the Wi-Fi there. I'd wait until I, got where I was going and didn't have it all download. But the whole sense of, wow, my goal of trying to clear my inbox is making my team crazy. So when it came down to it, I really had to stop and ask myself, am I giving them time and attention, or am I showing them how busy I am and thus creating a lot of busyness for their lives? So when I look at it in terms of trying to help leaders understand how not to do this, how not to make the mistakes that I made, I really break it down to 3 things. And the first is really understanding as a leader how you organize your day and your weeks and your quarters. So, and probably months too, it depends on what kind of organization, because typically there are things that you need to do at the end of each month and at the end of each quarter. But the real key, the proof in the pudding, as it were, is what you do with your days and your weeks and how you organize them as a leader. So when do you have time with your employees? When do you have time that's email time? When do you take time to develop people, to develop yourself? And how do you orchestrate that in a way that people understand it and they can see what you're trying to accomplish? What I was teaching them in both cases, early on, was that I'm so busy that I want you to know how busy I am. And that really wasn't my intention, but that's what came through. And so there's a reality to that. What's coming through is real. It may not be what you really want to have show up, but the fact that it is tells a story. But later on, in my effort to try and have boundaries, I broke everybody else's boundaries. So when I started to find time to develop myself, to develop my team, and to work on projects, I was able to control it much more. So in other words, instead of clearing my email every time I got on an airplane, I spent more time on a daily basis for email response and feedback. So let's take that one other step in terms of how your team sees what you're doing and what you're modeling. And that is, if you've ever received an email from your leader at 11 o'clock at night and felt that gut-wrenching fear of, should I respond or not? And what if I don't? And I'm going to venture to say that everyone watching this has had that happen at least one time, and sometimes that's a constant. That should be your marker for how you want to proceed with other people. And I'm not saying that there aren't times that you have to send those emails or that you have to respond to those emails, because that's true. You do. Sometimes there's emergencies, sometimes there's very urgent issues. But for the most part, if you operate in that mode, you are always operating in fire alarm mode. And everything is then crazy with that. So to help with the fire alarm mode and to help with how we operated with the team, I implemented what I call the stoplight approach. So the stoplight approach was really something that came to me thinking about how my team was reaching out to me and what they needed at certain times. And when I had 32 managers reporting to me, it was a really crazy time. We were going through a large restructure within our organization. It wasn't going to be that way forever. We were going to pare down that team and really realign it. But for many, many months, I had to have that number of people reporting to me, and we were evaluating them, and we were looking to see, who can take the next level of leadership? How do we need to streamline this? So I needed to allow them to have access to me, but it got crazy at sometimes. And sometimes the questions or the concerns they were coming to me with were felt at times like they were keeping me from doing the rest of my job. And as a leader, I didn't want to come across like, oh, I can't believe this person just asked me that question. And yet that would creep through. So I had to find a way to censor myself as well as to help them. So we put in what we called the stoplight approach, and this is the basis for it. So imagine this, clearly you've got red, yellow, green. So what I wanted my team to know is that they had accessibility to me anytime they needed to, but we needed to also censor ourselves. And the reason that I came up with this approach also, not only because of the volume of what was coming through, was because I started to feel a little itchy when I realized that most of my team, when they would call me, their statement would start out with, "I'm sorry to bother you," or "I know you're busy, but." And when I realized that that was a common way that they were trying to start a conversation with me, it told me immediately that they felt that they were intruding on what I was trying to do. And that was not the case at all. My job as a leader was to make sure my leaders were able to do what they needed to do, feel respected, feel developed. And if they felt like they were intruding upon me, then I was doing something very wrong. And I wanted to make sure that we stopped that kind of dialogue. But in order to do that, I needed to give them some guidelines to understand, because I couldn't have it be a free-for-all as well. So the red light approach was this. If you have a majorly urgent issue, text me right then. Don't email, because it takes too long, and I don't always respond to it because I only look at it a couple times a day. Don't call, because I need to have a little fair warning about what it's going to be. I want to know what we've got going on. But if you text me and say, red issue, what that means is I need you, and I need you now. I need it urgently, and I need you to find a way to drop everything you're doing right now. And the reason that I liked having that come through text was because it gave me time to think really quickly about that person, what I knew was going on, maybe within their territories at that time, or just to get myself in the mental state of what they may be facing. So when the red light message came across, I would walk out of a meeting, I would drop what I was on, I would get off a phone call, and I would call that person immediately, because that meant they needed me now and I needed to be there for them. The yellow light is very similar to the red light, but it's not quite as urgent. So if they texted me yellow light, then yellow light meant this is something I need from you before the end of the day. It is important, but it's not immediately urgent. And so the yellow made people think a little bit more clearly. In the beginning, I had a lot of people giving me red lights, and red lights aren't always red lights. So I would coach them later and say, okay, that sounds great. I'm glad we've found a solution, whatever the response was. But was this something that was an immediate, or was this something that was just important before the end of the day? And so the few people that originally used the red light, exclusively, then began to find the yellow light and the green light eventually. But it became a great tool for helping people understand the urgency of their situation and the immediacy or the immediate need to have a resolution. So the green light was a little different. So green light, I would say you can actually call me, because if I know you're calling me, it's not a red or yellow light situation. So leave me a voicemail if you want to leave me some details. Or you can email me or text me. So the flexibility was there for voice, text, or email with the green light. And that was, where people would use it to say things like, hey, when you have a few minutes, I need to bounce an idea off you. Or, hey, I need to talk to you. I need, approval for something before the end of the month, or whatever it was. But in those cases, most of the time, people would actually call me and leave me a voicemail, which I loved. For me, email is so frustrating and overwhelming. It's such a lack of connectivity. and you can't always convey what you want to convey, and you're thinking so hard about how to type it out, I'd much rather have somebody give me a video or a voice text or a voicemail and be able to at least sound it out. Because then by the time I'm able to call them, I've heard from their own words. So the third component of how I help people learn to focus on managing their time and attention for their team is to also understand that you're allowed to make some mistakes. And you're going to make some mistakes. And I always had fun with this because in the beginning, when people weren't used to me as a leader, they wanted to make sure they got my approval and buy off. And that's part of trying to test the waters of whether or not you are meeting your leader's expectations. So I get that. But I always tried to make people understand that, look, you're going to make some mistakes. And I make 7 or 8 of them before I eat breakfast. It's not the end of the world. And I want to get you to be more confident in making mistakes, because if you're more confident in making mistakes, you'll actually probably make fewer of them because you're more cognizant of them. But I want you to take good risks when possible. I need you to take good risks when possible. But I'd always joke and say, but there's 3 things that can never, ever happen in order, in a mistake, or it makes it really, really bad. And those 3 things are: no one should die, nothing should burn down, and no one should go to jail. And if you have even 1 or 2 of those, bad. All 3 of those, really, really bad. And I tried to make a joke of it always because it's really putting things in perspective of, make some good decisions, make some bad decisions, but don't make life-changing decisions that you're not confident in for the business. And that's when I want people to interact with me. And that's the whole foundation of the Tell Me More strategy of listen, learn, and lead. It's really getting people to think through before they make decisions so that they're not always seeking your advice and they're not always afraid to make any choices, that they find the right balance of when they should make the decisions. So here's what I want to leave you with in this thought is that if you have ever described yourself as that person that is, I am so busy, I am so crazy busy, then there's probably something that's coming through to you, from you to your team that you may not be aware of. And it's important to be aware of it. And it's important to really look for those signs, because when you are busy being busy, you are teaching people that they can't intrude on that busyness. And it's really, really detrimental to their long-term professional development. If you're not a leader yet and you want to be a leader, then the question is, are you one of those people right now that is so busy being busy? Because that will hinder your ability to be seen as a cool and confident leader in the future. And it's that sense of the people who panic too much are not the ones you want driving the boat, right? It's about you want the people that can understand the challenge and are very calm in those situations. That you may not always be calm inside as a leader, but you definitely want to have that image be portrayed. So here's your assignment. What I want you to do is reflect on the last week and ask yourself, how many times were you making yourself clearly available to your team? Or if the flip side, if you're not a leader yet, how many times did your leader make themselves clearly available to you? And the second part of that is, how would you describe that availability? Like, what does that mean? What does that look like? How are you impacting their professional development and not just helping them with their needs? And the third component is, what are you going to work on today to help make sure that you find the right balance between making time and giving attention to your team in order to get them to the next level of professional development and truly to shock their potential?